Perché se parlo non... Ah sì, adesso faccio. Ok. Very well. Welcome to all of you and welcome at this special masterclass. Warm welcome on behalf of the Consorzio Vino Chianti, the association of winemakers who have organized these activities in Milano Wine Week 2022. And welcome on my behalf. My name is Luca Alves and I am the wine ambassador and event manager of the consortium. And it will be a privilege and I hope a pleasure for you to accompany you throughout this short yet intense journey into a very particular denomination and appellation, and in particular of a very special wine, Vin Santo del Chianti. Before starting here, I'd like to tell you we are connected with two cities in the Far East, Hong Kong, Shenzhen. They are listening to us and they will follow us. And then at the end of the masterclass, there will be a Q&A. Also, therefore, I would like to welcome them.
Welcome from Milan. It's a very good pleasure to have you here, even if it's virtually. Today we're going to taste some
We are going to taste some special wines. In Shenzhen, I think that they have different variety of wines, but again in the Chianti denomination. And so it's a great honor and pleasure to share with you this new experience. So my aim is just to wish you a good tasting, and our local partners will help you with everything, including questions, if you have questions at the end of the tasting. So enjoy our wines and enjoy Chianti. So if we are ready to start, we can open our tasting. And I would like to start by explaining how we approach tastings at the consortium. As you can tell, you have some generic indications on your table without the names of the producers. And actually, the bottles are anonymized for two important reasons. The first being that the consortium, as you can expect, is a large association with 3,600 winemakers to date, and having all these wineries under its umbrella, it's like having 3,000 children. So it's almost impossible to favor, even though unintentionally, to favor one or the other producer. So that's why we serve the bottles anonymized, so that we don't give too much visibility to one or another producer. And also the second reason for these anonymous bottles is that tasting blind or semi-blind is a more interesting exercise. Certainly more challenging, because we focus on the product and on the wine, on the glass, which is what matters the most, that is to say, our denomination. So we will be tasting 7 great Vinsanto coming from different wineries. Then at the end of the masterclass, I will tell you the names, and so you will know what you tasted exactly. But above all, 7 different Vinsanto, from the driest to the sweetest. And we will end with the so-called Occhio di Pernice, which is yet another different type of Vinsanto, and I will tell you more about that later. Each and every one of these Vinsanto come from the 7 sub-zones of Chianti, because Chianti today has 7 sub-areas, sub-zones. And so definitely that's a special occasion also for this the presence of wines by subzones, and it doesn't happen every day to compare 7 different types of Vinsanto. And let me ask you a question first of all. How many of you know or have tasted Vin Santo del Chianti? Don't be shy, raise your hands. Well, many. And so, certainly, if you haven't tasted it yet, though, Vin Santo is a type of wine that has a special name. And so, Vin Santo, so somehow you heard about it. And I will tell you more. So it's from this etymology of the name Vin Santo that I would like to start my explanation. That is to say, why do we... Oh, the presentation got stuck? Oh, no. Okay. So why is Vinsanto called Vinsanto? Which is kind of very outstanding, high-sounding name. Well, there are plenty of legends around this name. However, none of them is de facto scientifically proven or consolidated, because actually Vinsanto is a wine that is enshrined in legend and mystery. Oh, it doesn't work. However, there are two or three assumptions. The first one is related to the time of the plague in 1348, when a monk, a friar, was told to treat through vin santo, which was probably more similar to a syrup in those days, so almost something you can spread very thick. So use that as an ointment for the plague, for people with the Black Death. And so that's why it's it's said to be a wine with miraculous powers. So that's why it's called Santo, saint. And other legends are related to the type of production of Vin Santo, which is made and following the Christian liturgical calendar, like Christmas, when grapes are crushed, or Easter, when the caratelli, so the cask where Vin Santo is kept, are opened. So this is a more technical explanation. Another one may simply be that Vin Santo is often used during the Mass, and therefore it's said to be sacred and therefore saint. However, the legend, which isn't actually a legend because it's more from a chronicle, that I think it's the most likely is related to event of 1439, when at the court of the Medici in Florence, an ecumenical council was convened to try to reunify the East and West churches that at that time were split. Of course, this event, you can imagine, was a very important event. The Medici family were the most important dynasty in Florence during the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. And so their power wasn't only political, but it was also related to the religion. So it was also a religious power. And so their ability to unify and convene all the powerful people of the world happened in 1439. And so during this sort of team-building event with the popes, various banquets and dinners took place, including one when they served the predecessor of the current Vinsanto. And among the various guests, there was a cardinal called Bessarione, who was coming from Nicer, Macedonia, Turkey. When he tasted this Vinsanto, said, but this is a wine from Xanthos. And so you have to know that Cardinal Bessarione didn't refer to Vinsanto made in Tuscany, but to the Vino Santo made in the Santorini island in Greece. And also another important thing is that Xanthos means yellow. And probably after that event, the combination of these 2 or 3 legends led to this name that identified this wine. So yellow wine, saint wine, and Vin Santo. So now we call it Vin Santo. Then a few details about Cardinal Bessarione. So this is what I told you before. So the relation between the religious festivities and the Christian liturgical calendar. So let's see what Vinsanto is today. Vinsanto, from 1996, is a denomination of controlled origin, so a DOC, and it's made with grapes which are dried. So this appassimento, this drying process is very extreme. I will describe it later on, though. It will have to age at least for 3 years in the case of just normal Vinsanto, or at least 4 years in the case of Vinsanto called Riserva. So Vinsanto del Chianti is a denomination that can be made not only in Tuscany but also in other regions in central Italy. And depending of the denomination of origin it comes from, it is named after. So Vinsanto di Chianti or Chianti Classico or Montepulciano or Carmignano, depending on the area where they make it. In this case, it's Vinsanto del Chianti DOC, which is part of the Chianti DOCG area. How is Vinsanto made? Vinsanto must be composed at least of 2 grapes in particular. Also individually, Trebbiano and Malvasia, white Malvasia. So the regulation is such that there should be at least 70% of both of these grapes, or individually one of these 2 grapes. And in this case, this is Vinsanto from white berry grapes. Then there is a version we are lucky enough to taste this morning too, that it's made with at least 50% of Sangiovese, which is a red berry grapes. It can be called Vinsanto Occhio di Pernice. So let's see a few more details about Trebbiano, the varieties. So Trebbiano in particular, it's Trebbiano Toscano and Malvasia, which is the white Malvasia, also often called Malvasia Bianca Lunga del Chianti because it is an elongated bunch. So Trebbiano Toscano. The Trebbiano Toscano is an indigenous variety, 100%, so much so that already the Romans talked about Trebbiana. So the name Trebbiano comes from Latin. These grapes are very acidic, and they are also vinified in white. So they make just still wine, not Vinsanto. But it's very useful for Vinsanto because of its thick skin, and the bunches are pretty big and heavy. So physically, these grapes lend themselves very well to the drying process. And often in wines vinified in white, it requires to be, let's say, processed a little bit, otherwise it doesn't have a structure, and also acidity is pretty remarkable. And also, it's the elder cousin, or as they say, the elder brother, the elder brother of the Uni Blanc from France that is used to make cognac or Armagnac. And it's estimated that this legacy, because Trebbiano is an indigenous variety from Tuscany, so apparently this variety was planted also in France and then it was thanks to the transfer of the Pope to Avignon in the 1400s. The other variety is Malvasia, called the Malvasia Bianca, because as you know, there is also Malvasia Nera, so red berry Malvasia. This is another very important variety in Tuscany. Not all in Tuscany, but also in Tuscany. And generally it's used to make more flavorful and softer wines, also with floral, more delicate and elegant floral notes. And it has a very interesting history behind, because I bet that many of you think that Malvasia is an indigenous Italian variety. But actually, the truth is that the word Malvasia, so the name of this variety, is a translation or transliteration better of a place name of a place, so a fortified city in southern Peloponnese, which is called Monemvasia. Monemvasia is south of Athens, and for centuries this has been a very important harbor, a port for Greeks who migrated, because actually Italy was colonized by the Greeks, especially especially southern Italy. It's called the Magna Graecia. Even before Etruscans started to make wine, learning that from the Greek. And that was a very important place, because the Mediterranean Sea was very important for trades in those days. And also, not only were Greek people great merchants, but also Romans, and also Venetians would travel to the Far East to buy spices and brought back the secrets of silk, like Marco Polo. So they were traveling across the Mediterranean Sea. They stopped at Monemvasia and they exchanged various goods. And almost certainly the Malvasia, which now we have, and we can say actually this Malvasia lunga del Bianchi, yes, it's an indigenous variety, now we can say so, but probably this variety was brought over to Italy from Greece. And there is another very important factor that connects the northern Italy, so the realm of Venice and Florence, because you know that silk that made the fortune of Venetian merchants. There was also many spices. So when the industry of silk started, the most important production area was not Venice, but Florence. And so probably in this further journey from Venice to Tuscany, this Malvasia has come to Tuscany and has become part of the indigenous varieties in Tuscany. Let's see how Vin Santo is made. So the harvest time comes, but before harvesting white grapes, generally we select the bunches on the vine. So in Tuscany we say fare gli scelti, so we select the best, most healthy bunches, because then they have to undergo drying. So collect them in small crates, in small quantities, and we take them first into a place which is the place where the magic happens, called the Vinsantaia, which is generally in the attic of the houses, and often these bunches are placed on mats, small wicker mats, called cannici, graticci, or stuoie. These are just kind of wicker mats. And and they are also hung from the ceiling. Sometimes it's both techniques they are used just to have space, because you cannot overlap the bunches, and so you have to use all the available space. So this is when the drying process starts, the appassimento. This process starts towards the end of September and continues at least for 3 months. And on average, it goes from 3 to 6 months of drying. And this is already the first difference that often people, because often Vinsanto is said to be a passito wine, but that's a mistake because from the time I told you, so this drying process is much longer than ordinary passito. And also this drying process happens indoor and not outdoor, so there's no contact with the sun, like for instance some passito wines made in southern Italy, or Vinsanto di Santorini from Greece. So this is a more challenging process, more meticulous process. Also, you have to check every day that the grapes get dehydrated correctly and the berries don't break and don't develop any rot. So we have to take care from 3 to 6 months for these grapes. So the Vinsantaia is a very, very special place, and for two reasons in particular. Because generally it's in the attic, and there is no temperature control system and no humidity control system. So apparently it's the worst place where to dry wine. We know that cellars have controlled the temperature and controlled humidity. So it might be seen as a mistake, but that's far from being a mistake in reality. And so let's see what happens after this period of time. Here you have a couple of pictures to see what happens. So in this picture, you see what we call the castello, the castle, which is a rectangular structure with some stones at the bottom, which is with various layers of mats where the grapes are put to dry. And if you can see, there is a window behind also, because aeration is very important, ventilation is very important. And of course, the temperature is not controlled. So the only protection is the roof that protects the grapes from rain and light. So this is a nice picture that shows us the hang bunches. And this is additional information. This is in, the slides are in English for everyone to read, but I am actually saying in Italian details that are contained in the slides. And in the end, finally, we get to when grapes are crushed. So after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on the habit of the winery, because Vinsanto is an instinctive family wine, traditional wine. So each winery has a slightly different recipe. So the grapes are collected from the masts, and they are squeezed out very lightly so as to obtain the must. And after the drying process, certainly you can imagine that the residual sugar in the berries has gotten concentrated, or at least much more so than in an ordinary must. So that must you see there, that it looks like a sort of orange juice. That this is what comes from crushing the grapes. And when grapes are crushed, 2/3 of the fresh product is lost. From 100 kilos of grapes, we get 1/3 of must to put in the barrels. And now let's start with the real magic, because this must is placed inside these special content, these small barrels, which we call caratelli, with very, very special characteristics. Let me tell you a few. First of all, caratelli are old barrels, very old barrels, 50, 70, 80, 100 years. Others have also previous lives, so for instance, also used for marsala production. Then the second very important reason is that these caratelli are made with local woods, local timber. That is very much reminiscent to reminiscent of a mentality based on the subsistence economy. So we weren't choosing the most valuable woods or timber from Lier or Slavonia or the best forests. On the contrary, we would use the just regular timber you would find around your farm. And generally, these woods, for instance, are not ideal for red wines, such as the timber from cherry trees, acacia, sometimes oak. And this is an element that is very makes every caratello different. Also because the slates of each caratello might be made of different types of timber. So if you put all this together, you know the impact on fermentation or the influence on wines is different depending on the caratello. So every caratello is a different fermentation system. And also, the Vinsantaia is a very dry place, and therefore the wood shrinks, and the product might come through, like with balsamic vinegar. So this means that the product that is put in the caratello, up to 2/3 of the content, will also undergo an oxy-reduction process. So the caratello then is closed and almost always sealed with wax or cement, and is left in the same Vinsantaia, same place, with no controlled temperature. So what happens? Well, when this process happens in Tuscany, it's cold, it's in January, February, sometimes March, far too cold to trigger fermentation the way we know it. So apparently the mast is there with a lot of sugar. There are already yeasts inside the caratello. And actually, sometimes we have the so-called mother, which is the residue of the previous fermentation, which some producer reuses for the next production, just to give specific characteristics to the wine. So microfermentation is very slow. So it's kind of dormant, but starts to ferment. And the interesting thing, the fascinating thing, is that it's not a mistake, but it's a special kind of trip, typical of Tuscan countrymen. So fermentation will accompany the seasons. So it will wake up in spring. Fermentation will be more lively, and in summertime it will become also very noisy. And if you go to Sia Vinsantaia, you will see that it's because the caratello was filled too much. So sometimes we have these tumultuous, these agitated fermentations and vigorous oxy-reductions. Then they will slow down in fall, stop in winter, then restart in the next spring, etc. At least for 3 years, according to the rule book of in Santo Comune, or for Riserva, it's at least 4 years. So let's taste the wines. And let's see how impactful is these fermentations and oxy-reduction. I told you at the beginning that Vinsanto is just is not an ordinary passito. It would be a bit reductive to call it a passito without offending the other passito. We can say that Vinsanto is an passito wine from oxy reduction with great aging, because often wineries keep them for longer than what the regulation asks for. And it comes in different styles. It's often sweet, and most often it's drunk at the end of the meal. But in the past, Vinsanto was a wine that was medium to very dry. And so it was used as an aperitif with starters. So it was the first wine that would be served to visitors in Tuscan houses. So the Vinsanto has changed. The face of this wine has changed a lot over the centuries. Here you have some details, the different types of timber that is used, that you may even find together in the same caratello. Then the fermentation that I described. Here you have some pictures where you see how these barrels were made in the past. I didn't mention the notion of litraggio, that is to say the volume. Generally, the Scaratello is 50 to 100 liters, and sometimes oh my God. Oh my God. So I change it maybe. Bisognerebbe dire alle persone che ascoltano, mi metto su un altro canale, perché lui dice che sente dei disturbi. Do you mind to put it on A? I do it. Però adesso gli altri mi sa che non mi sentono. Can you hear me now? Okay. Let me tell to the others to turn to A. If you don't mind, please put the translation channel from number 6 to A, so that there's no noise. So let's now taste wine number 1, Vinsanto del Chianti, 2005. We have Trebbiano di Malvasia. We are in the area of Chianti Monte Spertoli, 20 kilometers from Florence. Altitude isn't very high, around 300 meters. But this is a pretty lively area, because Monte Spertoli and the municipality of Monte Spertoli is the area with more vineyards in Tuscany. So no other communities in Tuscany has such a high concentration of vineyards. So tradition is pretty strong down there. And so grapes are dried from October to January, so 3-4 months, even longer, and then aging in the caratello, for a long time. If you do the math, about 15 years before being bottled. And probably this is our driest Vinsanto, together with the other one. Also the second one is very dry. And this gives us already, this tells us how much it can age. So if you look at these wines from above, you can see the first ones have a color that is slightly paler, straw yellow, so pale golden yellow, but all have a very bright and yellow. This is a very typical color of Vinsanto. So these wines are like a shrine with this natural bright light, which is beautiful.
Il naso è quello tipico
The
del
nose is
Vinsanto
the
di carattere secco,
typical nose
le note
of
volatili
the
sono
dry
tipiche di
Vinsanto,
questo
the
tipo di
volatile notes that are typical due to oxidation and
tutti i Vinsanti di primo
fermentation.
hanno questa
Almost all
caratteristica
Vinsanto have
volatile
these
e
volatile,
dolce, anche
acidic
piuttosto penetrante,
nuances,
ma vediamo
sometimes very
anche invece sul mondo
penetrating. But
dell'amandollato
we also have the almondy notes due
questa
to this long fermentation. The
mandorla
almond,
sorgeo-aromaticante anche
this
naso.
bitterish almond
In questo
note
io personalmente
that
noto
is typical.
anche
And personally, in this
delle
one, I
note leggere
also
come
find
di
some mild notes
solventi,
of
come di smalto, no? Che
solvents
sono
or
altrettanto tipici di certi
paints
vinsanti
that are typical
particolarmente
of
secchi.
particularly
È
dry
molto lucido
Vinsanto.
poi in bocca.
Let's taste it. Let's take a sip.
Beh, l'attacco in bocca
Well,
è abbastanza
the
vivace,
attack
bella
is
acidità,
pretty lively,
anche un
very good
po'
acidity, and
agrumante, se
also a
vogliamo,
bit
come le
citrusy,
scorze di agrumi.
like citrus peel
Specificamente
and
mi
fresh,
ricorda un po'
undoubtedly. And
Alicante,
also
appunto se
there
Chianti torna
is an after,
sulla
kind of bitterish
bollente, no?
aftertaste,
Chianti chiamato giusto, no?
this
Un po' mandorlata
almondy
e
note, this
le
almondy
parti dolci
aftertaste.
sono molto molto
And then
integrate
the
e
sweet
molto ferme,
notes are very mild
in
and well
maniera sempre in
integrated.
bocca non manca di
But
avere
in the
una
mid
leggera
palate,
grassezza.
there is
È un tipo
some
di
greasiness.
Vinsanto, questo qui un po' verticale,
So
no?
it's a kind
Che
of
in qualche maniera
vertical
a parte alta del
Vinsanto
palato fa
that
della freschezza
is
di questa nota appunto
has this
leggera
mild note, this
percentuale
freshness
caratteristica dell'ambiente.
that
Sono
is
questi
its
Vinsanti che
distinctive
abbiamo
feature.
questi due
And
che
this
potrebbero
Vinsanto, also
anche
the second
essere
one,
serviti a
this
temperature più
Vinsanto could
fresche,
be
proprio
served
per
at lower
valorizzare
temperatures
questa
to
caratteristica
enhance this
appunto
characteristic,
abbastanza eterea,
this
abbastanza leggera.
ethereal and light
E su questo poi un po'
characteristic.
ci spingeremo
And then
con gli
you
abbinamenti.
can also
Questo ricorda un
be
po'
creative
quei
with
vinsanti che
pairings.
dicevo
This
prima,
reminds
ovvero
me of the
il
Vinsanti
vinsanto intendo
of the old
secco
time,
che veniva
dry,
appunto
that was
offerto
offered
appena in qualche modo
once
si entrava nella casa
you
toscana.
would go visit
Abbiamo
someone
molti
in
amici che
a
ci
home in
accompagnano.
Tuscany.
Ovviamente se ci sono
Of
domande
course,
vado
if you have
avanti,
questions, feel
mi fa
free to ask.
piacere
Raise your hand, and it will be my pleasure to
Bene,
answer.
passiamo al vino numero 2,
Very well, let's move to wine number
il
2.
Santo del Chianti,
Vinsanto del Chianti,
riserva,
Riserva,
annata 2012.
2012.
Siamo in un'altra zona del
Now we are
Chianti,
in
siamo,
another
siamo
area of
vicino
Chianti.
al
We
paese
are
di San
now
Gimignano,
close to San
quindi dentro la
Gimignano,
Chieti.
in the
Abbiamo
hills
il
around
terreno qui
Siena.
che ha
And
una memoria
the
particolare
soil
perché
has a
come
special
sapete
memory
la
here because, as
Toscana
you know,
era
Tuscany
sovrastata dal
in the
mare
past was covered by the
e
sea,
quindi
so
questi
was
suoli che
underwater.
troviamo,
And
queste
so the
varietà di
soils,
suoli
the
possono
different
essere
types of
anche
soil,
diverse tra
sometimes very
sé del
different
Chianti,
in
è dovuto
Chianti,
proprio a questa
is
eredità,
due
questa
to
memoria
this
insomma
memory, to this
tradizionale.
legacy from the
E proprio
Pliocene
intorno a San
onward. And the
Gimignano,
area
ma
around
anche
San
le zone
Gimignano, but
intorno
also
alla Pisana
in the area
in
of Pisa
particolare,
in
hanno
particular,
spesso e volentieri
often
strati
have
su strati legati
layers
a eredità fossili,
related
fossili
with
marine
fossils, with
che spesso e volentieri
you
sono
will find
difficilmente
the so-called nicke,
riconoscibili, che sono
the
appunto
shells
una delle
that
caratteristiche
come from
dell'estazione
those
archeologica
old
in questo
times.
caso vicino a Pisano,
And so
oltre anche alla sabbiosità dei terreni,
in Pisa there is more
danno
sand,
un
in San
apporto
Gimignano there
particolare,
is
un
more
tipo
clay,
particolare
but this particular
dei
soil
Chianti che in qualche
give
modo
a,
fanno
a
Vinsanto.
particular
C'è da dire che il
personality
Vinsanto,
to the
essendo un
wines
vino
from Chianti and
che in qualche
including
maniera viene
Vinsanto.
trasfigurato nel
Vinsanto
corso degli
is a wine
anni,
that changes a lot over the years as it ages so long. It doesn't make much sense to talk about the year, the type of year, the impact of the weather, because I think the grapes undergo drying and fermentation and then aging. And I mean, it's almost impossible to relate it to a type of soil or another. In any case, here we are in San Gimignano. Here we have Trebbiano Toscano and Malvasia Bianca, which is 50-50 ratio. It's dry. Drying lasts until December, end of December. And then aging happens in small oak barrels, so oak caratelli, only made of oak, for at least 5 years. Okay, so let's taste also this example of Vin Santo. The color is not very different from wine number one. It's fairly delicate and mild. So we have this pale straw yellow, golden yellow. And on the nose, we still have this intense, dry, volatile note of almond. So almond is very clear, very overpowering. And we have these hints of paint. On the palate, it's very clean. In mid palate, we have more bitterish notes, whereas in wine number one, it was more citrusy, candied fruit. In this case, we have more the almondy notes, so it's more, slightly more bitterish and warm. Number one and number two are from 15, 16 degrees alcohol content. And I think you understood that Vin Santo is not a liquorous wine or a fortified wine. So all the alcohol you have in the glass is just the alcohol which is naturally produced by our caratelli. And so there is no. It's just a result of the aging process. Also good acidity, very good acidity. These two examples, despite they are pretty persistent and lingering, in the aftertaste, in the finish, we have a very good acidity that cleans the palate. So these Vin Santo leave the mouth and the palate very clean. And so you can pair them often we pair them with desserts at the end of the meal, but we can pair them with other things. We have the boat on the Navigli, and we have some tastings with Vin Santo, and we paired Vin Santo, different types of Vin Santo with various types of cheeses, because this wine is much more versatile than you might think. Okay, let's continue with wine number 3, if you have no questions.
No, there is not a definition of secco in Vin Santo. It is not like, I don't know, Marsala, for example. There is not a definition. It is more related to the taste itself. But
so the definition of secco is not available, but to give you an average, a sweet Vin Santo is 150, 180 milliliters milligrams.
Under 80, 70 milligrams per liter, roughly. Okay, some of them even they have 200 or 250. Not in this case, I think, but to describe a secco would be in this range. Sì.
Can you tell me more about the alcohol content?
Poi quindi vediamo,
The f-
però penso
I
che
will
sia chiaro.
reveal later, but I think I
Il
remember.
primo dovrebbe
The
essere
first one
micidiale,
should be 15
6,5.
degrees,
Il secondo
the
invece
second
qualcosa di più, 16
slightly
anni.
more, 16.
Bene, proseguiamo. Vino numero 3,
Wine number 3,
Vinsanto del Chianti Colli Fiorentini,
Vinsanti
quindi
di
realtà
Di
esplicitata
Chianti Colli
probabilmente sulla zona,
Fiorentini, so
siamo
that's the
più affini con
subzone,
Firenze,
province of Florence.
e l'annata era 2008,
And
quindi
it's
torniamo un po' indietro nel
2008, so
tempo
we go back
rispetto al
in time
precedente,
compared with the
e il
previous one.
brutto è
And
solo
the blend
a base di Malvasia. Quindi per la prima
is
volta
just a
in realtà
Malvasia. So
più
for the first
Trebbiano,
time,
più alimenti
the
intorno a
first one
Malvasia,
was
il secondo
Trebbiano with some
diciamo più anni
Malvasia, the
50,
second was
questo
50-50.
qua ogni
This
tanto
one is
Malvasia
just
bianco.
white
Siamo
Malvasia.
ancora in uno stile
We still have
abbastanza
a
secco,
fairly
abbastanza
secco, fairly dry
tradizionale.
style.
La zona di produzione è quasi limitrofe
And
al
the
confine tra
production
Colli
area
Fiorentini e
is
la
at the
Chianti
border
Montespertoli,
between
che sono
Colli
qui
Fiorentini
a
and
10
Chianti
km diciamo
Montespertoli, the two
da
subzones,
Firenze.
about 20 kilometers from Florence.
Affinamento, anzitutto appassimento
So drying,
che
first of
fino
all,
alla fine
drying
di
until
gennaio
the end
sono
of
più
January,
semplificati rispetto ai
so a bit longer
precedenti,
than
un
the
bel
previous ones.
affinamento, un affinamento
And then
scusate, di almeno 4 anni,
aging of
più
4 years,
chiaramente poi il
plus
tempo che decorre in
the
bottiglia. Io vi
time
sto
in the bottle.
menzionando il tempo
Of
in
course, I'm
caratello,
telling you the
però
time in
qualcosa
Caratello
di
in general,
più,
then you do the
abbiamo
math.
annate
We have
2005,
2005,
2008,
2008,
2012, 2013, vabbè, quindi
2012,
tutto il resto del tempo
and
passa
so
dentro le
all the
bottiglie
rest is
per,
spent in the bottles.
sapete insomma il vetro è
And as
un
you
prodotto
know,
importante di
glass
affinamento.
is an important,
Bene,
very
l'altore vediamo che è
important
leggermente più
aging
intenso rispetto ai
tool.
precedenti,
So the color is more
bicchiere ha
intense, and
un
in the
colore
mid palate,
leggermente più intenso,
in
ma
the mid
siamo sempre su
of the glass, in the
un
middle of the glass,
dorato non troppo
we have
carico.
again a pale golden yellow.
Il naso è molto diverso,
The nose
questo
is very
è
different.
un naso potente,
So this is a
molto
powerful nose,
intenso.
very
Se si
intense.
chiudono gli
So
occhi
if you close your
ci
eyes,
può ricordare anche
it
qualche
can
altro
remind
vino di
you of
Chianti,
some
qualche
other
Jerez,
cousin like
Fino,
Jerez,
qualche,
Fino,
non
or
voglio dire whisky, ma
I
insomma
wouldn't say
qualcosa
whiskey,
che ci
but
ricorda
something that reminds
la
us
volatile, la parte
of
appunto
the
eterea,
volatile,
impronunciabile,
ethereal
intensa.
notes and
La
intense
parte
notes.
anche un po'
And also
smaltata dei primi due mi
the
rende un
kind
pochino più
of
simile al palo di monte.
nail
Sentiamo questa cosa un
polish
po' da
note of the first
medicinale quasi, no? Però ecco, è molto
two.
molto
Here is more similar
viene
to
anche
the
da, diciamo,
husk
molto
of
vibrante.
walnuts.
Lo stesso naso ha già
And so
delle note
the nose itself has these
finale
pitterish
che si sente che
notes.
poi c'è un ritorno
So and
nasale
also in the
famoso.
retronasal notes are pretty bitterish.
In bocca è più pieno,
On the palate, it
più
is
cremoso,
more full and
centro
creamy,
bocca è abbastanza
and in the mid
dolce
palate,
rispetto ai
it's
precedenti,
sweeter.
però poi si allarga,
But then
non
it
è più
becomes
tanto
more
verticale
ample,
come i
and
primi
it's no
vini,
longer as vertical
comincia ad
as the
essere più
first two
orizzontale,
wines. It's more
pieno,
horizontal, more
avvolgente,
full,
base di bocca resistente
and also
anche per
warmer,
ritorno
and
abbastanza piccante, però
also
molto lento,
some nice bitterish
quindi un
notes, yet
pochino
very
più
clean.
vigoroso se
So it's
vogliamo,
a
un
bit more
pochino
muscular
più
and
cedoso,
more
però che fa
with
un
more
equilibrio
glycerin. But
tra le parti
the
semplici un
balance
po' più
between the
dure e le
dry and
parti più
harder parts
morbide
and the
ben
softer parts
bilanciatissime, ecco, proprio
is very
un
good.
vino dal carattere un po'
So
più secco
I
che
think that
dolce,
it's
ma anche più
more
intermedio,
dry than sweet, but more in between the
piatto,
first
se
two,
vogliamo, no? Questa
and
consistenza
also a
qua
bit more fat.
è più lenta, è
So
più
it's more
tolerante,
persistent
insomma, un pochino più intensa.
on the palate, more intense.
Credo
I hope you find it interesting to taste these wines that are more dry, because I imagine that many of you have an experience or have tasted in the past Vin Santo wines which are sweet or medium sweet. Because when you think of Vin Santo, you think of a sweet wine, whereas this is the proof that even though this is a niche, actually, we have more sweet Vinsanto on the market than dry ones. But I told you that Vinsanto originally was a pretty dry wine. So by this I mean that there is a broader range than what you can find on the market. So let's move on with number 4. If you have no questions, you have a question?
Ci deve essere un errore.
Oh, there must be a mismatch.
Questo dovrebbe essere poi dopo lo sveliamo, dovrebbe essere corretto. Il primo vino? Sì, questo è un refuso. In realtà lo è, ma non è menzionato in etichetta. È un refuso dei PowerPoint.
Yes, there is a mistake in the PowerPoint.
Sì, comunque fa testo la dicitura.
In any case,
Il testo la dicitura sulla salvatezza.
so look at your table. The information on your table is the most accurate.
Sì. Sì, esatto. Tecnicamente si deve.
So technically speaking, they have to wait 3 months, 3 years for base Vinsanto and 1 more year for Riserva. But then all producers generally wait longer. So generally they don't put the Vinsanto on the market immediately. Also because it's a very artisanal production, and I mean there is very little available, so there's no need to rush to the market. So number four here we are at the border between a sweet Vinsanto and a Vinsanto that is more traditional, more dry. So the subzone is different. We are in San Miniato, in the hills around Pisa, and the soils. Here the altitude is lower, 150, 200 meters. They are close to the sea, to the coast, and therefore the soils tend to have more clay and sand with backbone, with shells and fossil marine fossils. And this is a blend which is somewhat different from the others, because we have Malvasia, white Malvasia, but also some red Malvasia. We have the Trebbiano, and then we have another indigenous variety which is called the San Colombano or Colombana, depending on the area. It gets a different name, which often you find in the Vinsanto in that area. So this is very characteristic of this blend from this area. So we have, drying is a little longer, up to until February, and then aging in Caratelli, oak and chestnut Caratelli, small ones, 50 liters, for at least 6 years. And as you can see at the bottom, it's put on the market generally on the 9th year after harvest. As you can see, the color is slightly different. It's more amber color, chestnut color. So it reminds you the color of chestnut honey with these brownish nodes. It's golden in the middle. And in any case, it's a nice, very bright palette. Vinsanto wines can be tasted with your eyes too, because they are beautiful. They have these nice nuances and shades. For instance, all the legs are very interesting. They tell us about the sugar content, alcohol content, but also the texture of Vinsanto. So let's sniff the wine, and it's a mixture. Considering the previous one, we have the almondy notes and almost kind of underbrush mushroom, and again the chestnut hull. And for the first time, we have this sensation on the nose of the hydrated dry fruit, yellow fruit, raisin, for instance. And we have this persistent balsamic note, more persistent than in previous wines. And we start to have the honey like notes that are typical of Vinsanto. Of course, honeys can be different, but si può provare a mettere su A.
è molto setoso, abbiamo una bella acidità finale riprendente, abbastanza caldo, abbastanza orizzontale, abbiamo anche un po' queste note come discorsi di agrumi.
So we have these notes of candied fruit and with the walnut hull. So these bitterish notes. So sweet notes go hand in hand with a pretty significant acidity. And I think it's number 4, which is the last dry one, and the next one will be fairly sweet. So what do you think? You're very quiet. Very well, let's continue with wine number 5. And let's move to another subzone. Because from Chianti Colline Pisane, we go more to Chianti Montalbano, which is of the subzones. It's closer to the mountains. Montalbano is the name of the Apennines that embrace the Chianti area. We're in the province of Florence, even though the area of Montalbano goes up to Pistoia, so the province of Pistoia, Florence, and also Prato. And also in the area of Carmignano. Just to explain how this area is made. This Vinsanto is mainly made of Trebbiano and 20% Malvasia. So again, we have a blend only with white berry grapes. The soil, let's say that it's pretty typical. So there is a lot of the so-called galestro, which is a marly soil. And these hills are pretty dry and steep. And the wines are a bit more fine, which are more elegant, and the structure is a little less. Not very structured, but more fine and elegant. And in this case, it's not fermented in caratelli, but in old barriques. So larger barrels, though pretty small, because barrique is 225 liters. And aging is for at least 4 years. And then there is 1 year in the bottle. And as you can see, the color gets a bit more intense. This is more amber color than golden. It's always bright and shiny and clean and clear. We haven't found any residues. They're all very clean and clear. And the nose tells us another story because we have the warmth, dehydrated apricot, we have these sweet notes already on the nose. So it's already softer. So we don't have the ethereal part of the driving Santo. On the nose, we have a more accommodating and warm notes. And on the palate, it is more resinous. The residual sugar at the bottom of the palate is more relevant. It's not a very warm wine. For instance, number 3 is, yes, pretty dry, but also very powerful. This is more discreet, more modest, 15 degrees. It's a silky and it's very charming for its sweet notes, and it gives us an idea of dehydrated fruits, but still pretty juicy. It's succulent. So we have a fairly good acidity that cleans the palate. So it's quite balanced. Despite we talk about a wine which is no longer dry or medium dry, but pretty sweet. Very well. Let's move to wine number 6, and let's move to another subzone. We go to the highest subzone in Chianti. That is to say, the one that is the closest to the Apennines and with an overall average altitude which is the highest, which is Chianti Rufina. It's northeast of Florence, about 20 kilometers of Florence. The soil is fairly similar to the soil of Montalbano, maybe slightly more angular and rough. The wines of Chianti Rufina are pretty fresh, but with a strong character. And the Riserva wines are wines you can forget in the cellar because they have a great aging potential. Then the acidity of Sangiovese, even though we don't taste Sangiovese now, is an acidity which is pretty significant and that allows you on the one side to wait a little longer to put it on the market because it takes a little longer for these wines to find their balance, and on the other side they can age in a more distinctive way compared to many other wines for quite a few decades. And in this case, we go back to 70% Malvasia and then a portion of Trebbiano, so minority of Trebbiano. Drying lasts until December, so we have almost 4 months of drying. Again in the Vinsantaia, and then the aging is mainly in 50-liter Caratelli and also some in old barriques. Then let's taste it. The color is slightly lighter than number 6, so a bit paler, and it's similar to wine number 3. The color is similar to wine number 3. On the nose, it's slightly more musky, allow me this term, compared to previous wines. So we don't have the dried fruit note of wine number 5. which was very clear-cut, very evident, such as dehydrated apricot. In this case, it's a bit more herbaceous, more undergrowth, these notes that make you think of humidity, so damp places. And on the palate, I would say it's even drier than number 5. Maybe next time we reverse the order because it's a little drier. Despite it has quite a good residual sugar. When we taste these wines, we put them from the sweetest to the driest. Otherwise, it's difficult to taste them the other way around. But it's pretty lean, and despite it's a Vinsanto, it has a pretty elegant and fine character. We don't have notes related to over maturation, over ripening. We have a nice acidity. Yes, with hindsight, I think we should taste it before wine 5. However, so if you have no questions, we move to the last wine of this morning. And we try the occhio di pernice, the partridge eye, if we translate that literally. What is Vinsanto occhio di pernice? Well, it must be made with at least 50% of Sangiovese. And in this case, we have a Vinsanto which is only made with Sangiovese grapes. So that's a totally different base. And why is this occhio di pernice is more rare and also more expensive, and it's more difficult to find? Just because it's related to the drying of these grapes. You know that Sangiovese makes large bunches, but besides large bunches, it tends to have a thin skin, and it's very packed. And so dehydrating these grapes, by hanging the grapes is a bit more difficult. It's easier that you get some rot, that the skin breaks. And so that's why Chianti producers or producers of Vinsanto in general not always use Sangiovese as base grape. They often use it in a blend with some percentages, small percentages, because it gives quite a lot of headaches to take care of drying of Sangiovese because of its natural shape. Of course, someone is stubborn and does so for our pleasure. And so we have this opportunity to taste this different version, or let's say the other side of the coin of Vinsanto, with this Sangiovese 100%. And the color is a bit darker than 6, even though it's not too dark, though. And so it's, again, amber yellow with slightly different highlights, so slightly different shades like chestnut, honey, dark amber, brownish highlights, orange highlights. So the color of the wine is different given the different grape varieties used. Then the nose is totally different because here we have dehydrated fruits, but that's a different scale of nuances. We have ground coffee, cocoa notes, and this is typical of Sangiovese after drying. So this is a typical palette of flavors that sets apart these red berry this red Vinsanto. This honey is no longer acacia honey or chestnut honey. It becomes more balsamic, like eucalyptus honey. If you have ever sniffed an eucalyptus honey, it's pretty more thicker, and it's like menthol, minted, and very persistent. And therefore, on the nose, it is definitely different compared with the others. And also we have walnut hull. So if we sniff well, we have this kind of retronasal nuance of this bitterish note, and then coffee, a lot of coffee, so kind of burnt ground coffee from espresso. Well, on the palate, it is full-bodied, certainly sweeter. It reminds us, so the texture is more resinous, and it is more reminiscent in a positive way, of course, of some types of syrups. We in Tuscany have, in the area of Chianti Rufina, a beautiful abbey, which is the Abbazia di Vallombrosa, which is a church, an abbey from monks, a sub-order of Benedictines. And these friars make essences and medicaments and syrups. And this last one reminds me of those syrups, balsamic for sore throat, with this kind of minted menthol nuance. So it's sweeter, but it has a good acidity. So it's pretty ample on the palate, and so you can understand very well that there is Sangiovese here, unlike the others that don't contain Sangiovese. Very well. So we've tasted our wines. I don't know whether on the other side of the world you enjoyed them. I don't know whether there are questions or comments. If you do, please tell me. Let me repeat the question for our friends. And also, so the gentleman was asking about the average price and potential pairings for these wines. Well, of course, we will unveil the names at the end of the master class. The price range of the Vinsanto, unfortunately, is too low. And for us, because we drink these wines, the most expensive doesn't cost €30 at the Enoteca, so at the wine store. But if you consider all the work behind that and also the loss of volume, I think the price should be multiplied by 4 or 5 times, because there are many other wines that are similar to this style, oxy-reduced style or rigorous style, moldy style, have much higher prices. Though the styles are different, but let's say in terms of, in the eyes of the consumer. So the worst Sauternes costs 3 times a Vinsanto, but you have 3 times less work than Vinsanto and 10 times more the average production. So it's inexpensive. These bottles range from 25 to 30 euros in the wine store. And so it's too little, too cheap for the quality that they incorporate, even though these are half bottles. In any case, the average production in Chianti is about 1,000 half bottles per harvest. So it's very, very limited. So that's why we don't have a real market for Vinsanto. Also because there's not enough, because it's very artisanal. But on the other side, I invite all wine lovers, all lovers of Vinsanto to buy Vinsanto, because until it costs so little, we can profit. Of course, that's a positive, in a positive way. As to your question about pairings, I think that Vinsanto, including also drier ones, are much more versatile than we think. And I answer by telling you what we are doing in the boat and what that we've done in the previous years. For instance, we have paired them with cheeses, and we can play with the harshness of Vinsanto and the hardness of the cheese. Also texture or flakiness. For drier Vinsanto in general, I wouldn't use fresh or milky cheeses such as mozzarella and burrata, but with medium ripened cheeses are perfect, such as the driest one may be Castelmagno from Piedmont, which is often made with cow's milk, goat milk, and ewe's milk. So that would Castelmagno would work very well with a dry Vinsanto, because this acidity combination would accompany very well Vinsanto. If we think of more structured Vinsanto or resinous Vinsanto from the last 3 or 4, we can pair them with blue cheeses such as Gorgonzola or Gorgonzola Piccante. They pair very well because the resinous part of Vinsanto pairs very well with the spicy and pungent notes, and also with the creaminess, because when you pair products, we shouldn't only think of the taste, but also the texture. So the resinous texture of Vinsanto goes very well with the fatness of a Gorgonzola Piccante, and also Parmigiano, maybe Vacche Rosse Parmigiano, or aged 50 months. Or we can use it as a meditation wine with chocolate. Dark chocolate. We have done that on the boat, and we can. There are quite a few possibilities with chocolate. Maybe also chocolate that have additional ingredients such as orange peel or toasted almond, to try to connect these toasty notes, citrusy notes, and almondy notes that you can find also in Vinsanto, especially dry Vinsanto. And then another pairing, which is even more interesting. So if you are fond of tobacco, Vinsanto is an excellent pairing with tobacco. Kentucky or Cuban cigars or Caribbean cigars, and that would be perfect. Let me repeat the comment. He was congratulating, he was happy for tasting all these different styles of Vinsanto, which is which are not very easy to find altogether on the market. So the question was, what is the problem with related to this price, which he says is too low, if we compare it with the quality of Vinsanto, other competitors such as Tokai and Sauternes and other sweet wines.
I'm gonna reply you, answer you in English. Ah, ok, perfetto. I problemi credo siano due.
So the problems
Il
are
primo
two.
è di quantità.
The first is about quantity, because Vinsanto is a very limited edition all the time. It's too little and it should cost much more than the available one, because it's not very much available. I mean, producers often don't bet on Vinsanto. And this is something that often they drink for internal use, for friends, or for I mean, in the cellars, but they are not betting on that. Then the second problem is always a marketing problem, because Vinsanto has suffered for many years of bad advertising, because when in the past Vinsanto was used for many wines, which often were not even wines but liquorous wine, which was completely different from this one. And so this was perceived as a poor quality product. And also in Tuscany, in the Osterie, until the 90s, Vinsanto was offered because it was not Vinsanto, it was aromatic licorice wine that was worth nothing. So this dual nature between this DOCG with unique production value and relevant effort has clashed for a long time with this past a bit unhappy, neglected of what was called the Vinsanto. So from now on, so from 96 on, we have to try to enhance the quality, but also giving Vinsanto a different place on the market, which is different from the one it currently has. Are there questions from the other countries? In any case, I can answer also later if you have no questions. I would like to thank you very much before we leave the floor to Federico to greet the ambassador in Hong Kong. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to share with you some tastings, especially when when we do that for Vinsanto. And I'd like to I hope you remember this nice tasting, and then you can taste this Vinsanto at home at the restaurant. Remember that Vinsanto is no longer what you were told in the past, but it's what we have tasted today. Thank you, and the Mass is over. Thank you. Thank you, Luca. Please stay here with me, because now we leave the floor to Hong Kong. Thank you for this beautiful tasting, as usual. And so we leave the floor to Hong Kong, where our General Consulate, Carmelo Ficarra, is honoring us with his greetings to Milano Wine Week, and then I will spend a couple of words.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Carmelo Ficarra. I'm the Consul General of Italy in Hong Kong since 5 weeks now, which have been very intense. The first thing that I'd like to say is that I'm very happy to be here, very happy to be in Hong Kong, and I'm very happy to share
Io non traduco niente. Lui parla inglese.
Wine Week to celebrate Italian wine and to be with you tonight. Later we will spend a dinner together, continuing appreciating Italian wine. I would like to say hello also to our friends in Italy. President Bordini, I think you can hear us, you can listen to what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yes, okay, very good. So a special thanks to Milan Wine Week, to the organizers in Italy, to the Italian Trade Commission here. I think this is a great opportunity for a series of reasons. First of all, because it links so many cities in different parts of the world, and linked with this wine. Wine is a very important product, a very important source for Italy. Not only because it binds us food and beverage sector, but also because, as I believe you can experience it tonight, it is a cultural journey in our country, in Tuscany especially tonight, because in my understanding you had the opportunity of testing 7 different types of wines from Tuscan regions. But since I'm talking to experts much more than me, we know that the journey could be organized in the 20 regions of Italy, and I really hope that we can replicate it. We can the project will be renewed next year. This year, 2022, we have planned two master classes. So today is one of them. The very good news is that we can do this master class together here in presence. We respect COVID rules, restrictions, so I see that you are sitting distance long from each other. Next year we could do better, I hope, and we can even invite some of you to go to Italy and be with our friends of other countries in Milan.
Thank you, grazie al nostro console generale. Noi siamo felici come Milano Wine Week di essere anche quest'oggi ad Hong Kong.
So many thanks to our Consul General. We are very happy to welcome you at Milano Wine Week. This is an initiative that continues, and we are always seeking for new occasions, for exchanging, for having interactions with international players of the wine world. It's an honor for us. And we will try to organize more events in Milan and Hong Kong. And of course, we wait for you in Italy. We are in a very great, extraordinary territory, thanks to the great tasting of with Duke Alves. We have explored the world of Vinsanto, which is a wine that deserves much more attention than it has, because these events, that's what these events are for. Chianti is a great consortium, Vinsanto is a great excellence, and we invite you to discover it through these events and the many initiatives that also the Chianti Consortium has organized. And the idea is also to invite people to come to Italy, because we have so much to offer, and also more and more regions and wines, because we have 500 denominations of origin in our country, and so we can definitely offer can please the tastes of all of you, and also there is so more attention to be deserved to many products who haven't deserved enough attention so far. Thank you.
Mr. President, if I may add something, of course we really appreciate the invitation in Italy, but I think that I would like to interpret the wish here to have you in Hong Kong. event that you would like to plan, because as much as Italy has a lot of offer, in Hong Kong we also have a lot of things to offer in terms of love and interest in our country. So I think Hong Kong deserves your visit here as soon as it can be possible for you to travel to Hong Kong. And one more thing, allow me to probably to do a short marketing on ourselves, our activities here, since I'm talking to a great audience tonight. So the masterclass and the project today is one of the many activities that Italian community is organizing in Hong Kong. And just a few words to say that late October we will have a long activity starting on the 20th of October. It's a big project that for the fourth time happens in Hong Kong. It is
Perché
called
Massa mi vuole
Italia.
chiamare urgentemente?
It is a series of events to celebrate and to offer to the Hong Kong public the best
Vuole che vada
experience
tu?
of the Italian lifestyle in different sectors. So you're all welcome to join, and to learn more you can follow our channel of communication, social media, to learn about the
Vuole
program.
casa?
And I believe that I'll see you later on the other room for the dinner. It will be a pleasure to introduce myself individually. Thank you so much.
Grazie signor Console, grazie. Un applauso da Milano ai nostri amici.
So many thanks and a round of applause to our friends in Hong Kong, and we hope that soon we will have more international events in presence. In October we are in Milan, but definitely thank you for our invitation. We can organize more activities in the rest of the year to bring over the most important Italian wineries in Consorzio in Hong Kong. Thank you.